Hello, everyone. Welcome. We have Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic is Chief Innovation Officer at ManpowerGroup. He's a professor of business psychology at Columbia University and a co-founder of DeeperSignals. He's an international authority in psychological profiling, talent management, leadership development, and people analytics, and has published 10 books and over 150 scientific papers, making him one of the most prolific social scientists of his generation. His work has received awards by the American Psychology Association and the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, to which he is a fellow. Tomas, I will let you take it from here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my ideas and my views. So as the advertorial and the event kind of marketing materials anticipated, I'm going to focus not just on one topic, but on one question only. So for about 20 minutes, I'll try to answer this question, and then I hope we can transition into a smooth and fruitful discussion on the topic du jour. So the title of my latest book, which is Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders and How to Fix It, is a question that I want to answer today. It's a book that was written at a time where ties were slightly more common than today. Today with so many people hybrid working and not in the office, and informality taking over in many organizational cultures over formal attire, ties are almost becoming extinct, unless if you're a soccer manager or a sports presenter, which is somewhat paradoxical since ties are not necessarily an obvious item for those professions. But what has not, however, disappeared and become extinct at all are incompetent leaders. And when you try to look at the demographic spread or frequencies that underpin incompetence in leadership roles, men over-index vis-a-vis women. So this is not a value-loaded statement. It's not virtue signaling. It's not wokeism or an attempt to kind of, incense people or throw gasoline to the fire of an already intense battle between the sexes. One of the questions that I get asked the most, probably in reference to my title, is why I didn't title the book, Why Do So Many Incompetent People Become Leaders? And people reference that many people have worked for incompetent leaders who were female rather than male. But the facts are, the hard data show very clearly, if we look at the data anywhere in the world, you'll find that the vast majority of leaders are male rather than female, and that the majority of leaders or people in leadership roles are not competent. They are more likely to be underperforming than performing okay. How do we know this? Global engagement data showing that about 13% of people love their jobs or are excited and engaged and motivated and enthusiastic at work. The majority are not. One of the three most common reasons for quitting your job is your relationship with your boss or what you think of your direct line manager. The other two, which have to do with lack of developmental opportunities and inappropriate or sub-adequate pay, also depend on management or leadership. So they're all connected. It's based on a recent research report that McKinsey published. So the reality is that for a long time, we've realized and admitted the fact that most people in leadership roles are male rather than female, but the reality is that they're also not performing very well. So statistically speaking, if you work for somebody, the probability that that person is incompetent is higher than the probability that that person is competent, and the probability that that person is male rather than female is higher than the reverse. So the question that the book tries to address is whether this is a coincidence or whether there is actually a causal link underlying this correlation. The fact that not only are most people in leadership and management roles male rather than female, but also most people in management roles are ineffective, incompetent, underperforming, and inadequately suited for that role. And so with that, what the book shows with extensive data from independent, peer-reviewed, academic, journal articles published in prestigious and well-validated scientific publications, some of the work that my colleagues and I have done, as well as work done by other scholars, again, independent, credible research, is that the main gender difference that crops up if you actually study the profile of not just leaders, but male and women, is a difference in confidence. Systematically around the world, wherever you go, whether that's Japan, Argentina, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, or Finland, or China, and on average, men tend to overestimate their leadership talents, their intelligence, and their talents in general. When you're a male, you're more likely to think highly of yourself. And when you're a female or a woman, you're more likely to think less highly of yourself compared to men. Okay, so gender predicts how you think of yourself. And this systematic and significant difference in confidence that we find between the genders, so between the sexes, really, because we're looking here at biological sex and not at psychosocial gender orientation or identity, which is important, but it's a different subject altogether. Your sex predicts how you rate your abilities and how you think of yourself. And if you look at people who think exaggerately positively of themselves, who have a very high opinion of themselves, one that is completely disconnected of their actual talents, so people who are unjustifiably pleased with themselves and unaware of their limitations, so people who need, would need not just self-awareness, but a reality check to lower their confidence and think more accurately of themselves. In that segment, there's about 80% of men and 20% of women. And so, ordinarily, unless you're into kind of a self-help pop psych, we would diagnose this as a problem. We know, if you look at rational arguments and data and hard facts, that being overconfident to the point of being deluded about your abilities has a lot of negative consequences. When you overestimate your talents, you're less likely to work hard to close the gaps between the talents you have and the talents that you want to have. When you overestimate your talents and become deluded or self-deceived, you will underestimate risks and threats. You will likely take credit for other people's achievements. You will blame others for your mistakes. You will be defensive if you are criticized. You will not learn from experiences and not translate experiences into smart failure opportunities that actually make you better. You'll be in denial about your own mistakes and your own flaws. And fundamentally, you will come across as arrogant in interactions with others. In fact, the people who most likely appear in this sort of quadrant, or in this bracket or bucket of people who think unrealistically highly of themselves to the point that they are quite detached from their actual abilities, and again have a very distorted and unrealistically positive sense of self-worth and concept, are narcissistic individuals. Okay, people who are entitled, people who overrate themselves, who have high aspirations with a poor work ethic, and people who have an unrealistic superiority complex over everybody else. And so even though logically speaking, or in a logical world, this should be detrimental for individuals, and this kind of profile should be the last kind of profile we seek to have in leaders when we elect or select leaders or people into leadership roles. Actually, paradoxically, these characteristics, these traits and habits and behavioral tendencies that I described, actually help people emerge as leaders, whether in for-profit corporations, non-profit corporations, government, across sectors, politics, etc. And there's a very, I think, compelling and interesting evolutionary explanation for this, which is that it is a lot easier to deceive other people into thinking that you're more talented than you actually are if you have already managed to fool yourself, right? So just like great salespeople don't need to lie to others and engage in sort of laborious and tricky and challenging and tedious emotional labor to fake their emotions into others and tell people that what they're selling is useful and persuade them to buy whatever they're selling if they have bought the idea themselves and fooled themselves into the idea that they really have a killer product that is great. So by the same token or the same standards, if you have fooled yourself into thinking that you're amazing and you're unaware of your limitations and ironically you lack self-awareness, you will be able to fool others. In part, or largely, I should say, because in a world that is very, very complex and where actual talents, the relevant talents that we need in people, especially in leaders, are very hard to observe directly. Things like technical expertise, domain-specific expertise, intelligence, curiosity, empathy, people skills, integrity, coachability, humility. We think we can observe all these things, but actually more often than not, we are blinded by style and unable to distill the substance of presentational styles. And in a world where people are too lazy to spot competence, it's all too common to be unable to stop incompetence. And so, think about how most leaders are selected. I mean, the number one selection device in organizations is still the job interview, the face-to-face interview, mostly unstructured and poorly devised or designed interview. There's a lot of research indicating that people with narcissistic and psychopathic tendencies interview very well. Why? Because they think they're great. Which leads to a sense of invincibility and an assertiveness and a fearlessness that if you don't get nervous in a high-stakes situations like a job interview, others must look at you and say, wow, this person must know what they're talking. They must be really good. This must be even like leadership material. And we focus on things such as whether they look leader-like and whether they have executive presence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's sort of the world of organizations and jobs. If we look at the world of politics, unfortunately, even in educated and highly functioning-ish democracies, most voters, regardless of their skills and qualifications, but even when they are very educated and when they have some knowledge about politics, want to make decisions based on a 2 or 3 minute clip of a televised presidential debate or prime ministerial debate where the focus is on style and not substance. So when this happens in a world that glorifies assertiveness and that focuses not on how good people are, but on how good people think they are, and that actually celebrates narcissistic tendencies and the tendency to have skyrocketing levels of self-belief, and that glorifies confidence at the expense of self-awareness or self-knowledge, it is not a surprise that men over-index in leadership roles, and that the particular kind of men that over-index in leadership roles are not very competent. Because what you need to lead effectively is the opposite of what you need to emerge as a leader in this context. In order to lead effectively, which means enabling a group of people to collaborate productively and become a synergistic unit and a high-performing team, where people can set aside their individualistic agendas and their egos and work for each other and achieve something together that they couldn't achieve individually. What you need to do in order to help a team achieve this, or a group of people achieve this, is not to be a self-centered, greedy narcissist who doesn't have much skill or much talent for the job, but you need to be competent, have technical expertise, be smart, be data-driven, be humble, care about others and have true empathy, exercise compassion, be inclusive, and have the humility to want to get better. So, in the last part of the book that I'm discussing, which again, if you just tuned in, is why do so many incompetent men become leaders and how to fix it. And yes, it is men, it is not people or women, because men over-index in leadership roles and incompetent men over-index in leadership roles. This is very important to highlight because at the moment, this perverse process that selects people on the basis of their confidence and their assertiveness and their narcissism also punishes competent men who ironically are overlooked for leadership roles because they are self-aware, humble, empathetic, and they're not blowing up their own trumpet all the time. What we need to do to stop this vicious and perverse kind of bias that actually puts people who aren't very equipped and suited for the job in charge, where they're responsible for a lot of others, hundreds of thousands of people, and where they have a disproportionate impact on the well-being of others and they determine the fate of teams, groups, and organizations, is really to be data-driven. And there are many, many different ways to achieve this, but fundamentally you need to, this is what the last chapter of the book addresses, you need to follow the science and first look for the qualities that make people better leaders, even or especially when they don't usually make them leaders in the first place. So that is focusing on qualities like competence rather than confidence, and select people on the basis of their humility rather than narcissism, and on the basis of their integrity rather than charisma. Focus on sub-style and not on style. And in order to do this, you need to use data-driven tools, science-based assessments, artificial intelligence, data analytics, a combination of these methods that basically decrease the reliance on human intuition and take out the bias from the selection and the recruitment and the promotion process. As much as there is a lot of pushback right now against AI and data science, and for all the talks about bias in algorithms, the most biased creatures in the world, and the creatures that actually aren't just biased but determining the success and future of others, are humans. And no matter how much unconscious bias or implicit bias training humans undergo, even when they're open-minded and well-being, they cannot suddenly ignore the fact that the person in front of them is male, female, attractive, unattractive, charismatic, assertive, etc. So even when people have the right intentions, it's very difficult to judge competence and to judge leadership potential without the help of proper tools and proper data. Of course, there are some people who are very, very well trained interviewers and who have an acute clinical ability to observe people and realize whether they are narcissistic rather than confident, or whether they are deluded rather than competent, and whether they are empathetic or just very skilled Machiavellian manipulators. But for each and one of these individuals, there are 99 who think they are amazing and very good at it, and who unfortunately fail, and they still make consequential decisions. And in the realm of data-driven tools and approaches, what we know is that psychological assessments, so assessments of soft skills and people behavioral tendencies, are not just a very strong, consistent, and compelling way to predict future leadership success and failure and to actually judge leadership potential, but they actually have the advantage and the ability to also make people more self-aware, to give people feedback on their strengths and weaknesses, to reveal certain blind spots, and to help people understand themselves better and be understood more. And so, although most people in the world, including most workers in the world and most people who get to management roles or leadership positions, have never taken a science-based assessment and a data-driven assessment, we're at a very promising point in time, because thanks to advances in AI and analytics, it is now possible to shorten and simplify what used to be very long assessments to help people understand themselves better and therefore function better in a world that, quite frankly, is feedback deprived, and where they don't have a natural ability or the possibility to receive much needed feedback to align their self-views with their actual talents. And so I think if we have Reese and the DeeperSignals here, post a link to a free version of the assessment that we created. People can try it out, get instant feedback on their strengths and weaknesses, and judge their own leadership potential. So, in essence, and we can transition to the Q&A right away, there are two sides of the coin. One is fixing the system and is enabling those who are responsible with selecting or electing leaders to understand leadership potential better and to actually make more data-driven decisions so that people are placed in important positions of status, power, and leadership because of their skills, because of their talents, because of the right personality characteristics, and not because they have been able to somehow fool others and squeeze to the system and, emerge as free riders or imposters. But then there is also helping people, whether they get to leadership roles or not, understand themselves better in order to actually improve and develop their own potential. All great leaders, I always say, are always a work in progress. So even if you have leadership potential and if you have done a good job as a manager or as a leader in the past, you need to get better. And you only get better by understanding yourself better and by having a deeper understanding of your potential. And that can only happen if you have data-driven tools. So with that, I think we can transition into what I hope will be a thought-provoking Q&A segment of this discussion. Thank you.
If anyone has any questions for Dr. Tomas, please leave them in the chat, and we can start a conversation based off of those.
And I'm very happy you came back. For a moment, I thought everything I was seeing, which was mostly my face, was the product of my own imagination, a dream of which I have now woken up. So I don't know if this really happened or we're just fragments of bytes in the metaverse.
No, we're all watching you. All eyes on you.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Any questions? It looks like we have a couple questions popping up in the chat. Can you see those?
Yes. Do you want me to take them directly? Yeah. I'm happy to go if you want. So the first one says, Tomas, can overconfident, incompetent leaders be successfully coached into being more competent? If so, how? Yes, of course they can. I think maybe to think about a useful analogy, imagine that you are very unhealthy or very unfit because you never exercise in your life and you might not have a natural predisposition to being very athletic or very healthy. No matter how bad your situation is, there are lots of things that you can do to improve your state. I mean, all of these things depend on behaviors that you are free to choose. And, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that some people will find it a lot easier than others. And one of the, one of the ways in which we can help people is with science-based or evidence-based coaching. Evidence-based coaching always needs to start with a good assessment of the individual, understanding the whole person, understanding in a deep way their potential and having a good sense of who they are, what they want, what they need to do better, etc. And so once you can give the person feedback and you have a good assessment as to who they are, it's all in their hands. It's all in their ability to choose the right behaviors. And that ability depends on their personality. And personality is not set in stone, but it does constrain or enable your development. And here's where the paradox comes, that in the world of coaching and leadership development, those who make the biggest progress and who improve the most and get better or shift from less competent to more competent or from incompetent to competent are probably the ones that were in less need of coaching in the first place, the ones that needed less coaching in the first place, because these individuals tend to have as personality characteristics the fact that they're more open to feedback, they're more curious, they're more humble, they're more driven, they're more interested in helping others, and they're more interested in actually improving their potential, which tends to happen far less in individuals who are overconfident, narcissistic, and unskilled or unprepared or ill-equipped. So in a way, coaching and development tends to augment leadership potential more than it tends to pivot or switch or drastically kind of change the course of action in which people are. So but that's okay, it's okay, because at the same time, obviously it's very hard to coach somebody who doesn't want to improve and who doesn't want to be coached. So again, to go back to the question, if you think about a normal distribution, most people are average, so they can always get better, improve, or get worse by about 20-30%. The people at the extremes are harder to change, and that might include people who don't need coaching and people who are uncoachable. So selecting the right people, selecting on the basis of their potential, always solves half of the problem, and prevention is much better than cure in the case of leadership development and coaching as well. Over to the next question from Andrew, and please keep them coming. I'm seeing 3, 4, 5 excellent questions so far. So Andrew says, do you have recommendations to start feedback conversations with an incompetent leader? It depends, there are many reasons for being incompetent, and incompetence comes in many different shapes, forms, and styles. So, but broadly, there are people who are technically inept, so they're just basically inexperienced. They haven't been trained on how to lead. They don't have technical expertise, and sometimes they suffer from deficits in their style and personality that aren't malevolent or aren't antisocial or aren't toxic, but they're problematic, right? They might lack people skills. They might be, very reserved. They might be so agreeable that they avoid difficult conversations. And even if you ask them for feedback, and they know that you're not performing and that you have to improve, in an attempt to avoid difficult conversations and avoid disagreements or conflict, they will tell you, no, everything is fine, and that's actually hurting you more than if they told you what you're doing wrong. So it depends really on who they are. Then you have the types that I describe a lot in the book and that I was referring to in my opening kind of monologue or discussion with myself, which is people who, they might be skilled, they might be smart, they might be potentially technically good, but they're very selfish, they're very self-focused, and even though they're good, they have a distorted sense of their abilities that actually precludes them or stops them from being effective. So look, I think whoever they are, some general principles or rules to consider are the fact that you need to understand them as well as you can. It helps you to understand what makes them tick, how they think, how they see the world, how they want to be approached, and at what moment and in what terms you can kind of solicit the feedback. I think you have to make it very easy for them. I think, you need to be very factual. You need to, for example, they're shying away from negative feedback, make it easier for them to criticize you. So, tell them, if you were in my position doing this task or this job, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would have done differently? What do you think I could have done better in this sales engagement or client presentation or this project I managed? What are the 3 areas that you think I should improve the most? Try to be factual, try to be succinct. Don't ask very general, open questions such as, how am I doing? Or wasn't this amazing? Don't probe them to provide you with positive feedback. And fundamentally, probably the most important part of this advice, be very receptive and not defensive, and appreciative of the feedback you get. We always hear people say feedback is a gift, but sometimes it does feel like that sort of awkward or unwanted gift that somebody gives you for your birthday or for Christmas, and you have to actually almost remember to force yourself to fake that you're very happy and grateful, but you're like, not going to wear this or use it. So, you have to, in order to reinforce people and validate them and get them to give you feedback more often and repeat, you have to be appreciative and you have to be grateful and you have to take it on board. So that's that. Although, Andrew, I always say, if you're really working for somebody who is almost dispositionally toxic and almost pathologically narcissistic, I think running away is a far better strategy than trying to change them, their behavior or their personality. I was recently talking to somebody who said, but why shouldn't you try to change them? And if you can actually change your boss and change them from arrogant to humble, from incompetent to competent, and from cold and callous to empathetic and caring, then they were probably not narcissistic to begin with. And actually, they probably had a lot more potential than you thought. Dave Rosner says, as a hiring manager, what would you suggest as a means to identify truly qualified individuals? Great question, Dave. And I think don't do it all yourself. Don't rely on your intuition. Don't try to become an expert in talent or potential, which is a very difficult and complex and permanently changing and evolving field. But like everything, use the help of professionals. So just like you probably don't install your own boiler, but you call a plumber, and you don't fly a plane, but you go to a plane that is flown by a pilot. And if you need, brain surgery, you don't do it yourself or ask your aunt or cousin, but you go to a hospital. There is a science to selecting the right people, and there is a science to identifying leadership potential. So use the help of a professional, contract with people if it's not your internal department because it's small or you don't have one or it doesn't have people who are very qualified. Use vendors, external consultants who actually understand talent and potential, and challenge them, challenge them to prove you why, where they, to provide you with data and evidence that actually they understand human performance and they can predict it and they can measure human potential. And so with that, no matter how much you need to spend or how big you are and what type of firm you are, there is always a more evidence-based and scientific approach to do it. And you don't have to suddenly go out there and get a PhD in either psychology or assessment or talent or potential to do it. There's plenty of people who know. And perhaps identifying the right vendor and the right partner is the most important thing, because a lot of the mistakes that are made are because people fall for people who actually are not as good as they say in identifying and understanding leadership potential. So the short answer again would be contract or use the help, and list the help of competent and ethical professionals who actually know and understand the area. Lisa says, does this explain the frequent failing up we see in corporate America? Yes. And I could stop there, but it's such a good and important question. You're right on the money here, Lisa. And I think, the Peter Principle predicts my research and the book and the original article, but it focused more on, I think, a more harmless force that underpins many of the organizational dynamics in corporate America and most corporations, not just in America, which is, this idea that people get promoted to their own level of their incompetence. In other words, if the main criterion for promoting somebody into the next role is how well they did at the previous role, eventually there's going to be a role at which you're not good at because you can't, systematically succeed. And, the big symptom that reflects or highlights the problem underpinning this effect is that a lot of people are great individual contributors. They're very good employees. They're good at solving problems. They actually enjoy being just themselves in front of a problem, tackling it, and working for somebody. And maybe they're very good at managing themselves, but they have very little interest in dealing with other people's problems and managing a team of 20, 30, 40 people. And ironically, the better you do as an individual contributor, the more likely that you end up in this situation where you're rewarded or promoted by having to manage a team, etc. So that is, I think, is an accurate principle that explains why people fail up, but it failed to account for this important issue or special kind of scenario where we bring into the equation narcissism, confidence, charisma, assertiveness, and where, again, paradoxically, if you weren't very good at doing your job and you didn't pay much attention to others and your teams, but you spent all of your time promoting yourself and managing up or sucking up to others, and if you were a first-line manager or a mid-level manager and you actually spent little time managing your team and dealing with your team's issues, but were very good at impression management and you had a great cachet and reputation going up, you will probably get promoted over somebody who is a hardworking and productive manager and truly was focused on leading and managing their teams, which is what they should be doing. So if you think about it, in the field of diversity and inclusion, even when we see things such as lean in and we blame women and point the finger at them for not promoting themselves more and not being overconfident and assertive and engaging in more pathological self-promotion and applying for jobs when they're not qualified, when they meet 2 out of the 10 requirements, and we tell them to combat their imposter syndrome and to speak in meetings even if they have nothing to say. And so we basically force and want to nudge or convince women to behave more like incompetent men. We're not fixing the problem, and we basically confirm how pervasive these flawed and biased standards are. There's a quote that goes all the way back to Plato in ancient Greece. He says, "Only those who don't seek power should be allowed to have it." And that's exactly what we need, not just in corporate America or in America, but in the world in total. A world in which those who are diligently and competently doing their jobs are not self-promoting and not putting their hands up and not, speaking louder than the others, but they are quietly waiting to be tapped on their back until they are invited to lead, because that's exactly what we need in leaders. So I think in failing up continues, the problem sort of cycle continues to manifest itself when then we still glorify people, but especially men, not so much women, after they fail upwards. And I'm sure many of you have seen the documentary on WeWork and Adam Newman on how, he's still probably working on a best-selling autobiography and walked out with 2 billion or whatever, and is still probably a big inspiring guru in Burning Man, etc., because he actually made it. And I mean, he screwed the system and was a very successful individual. So we spend too much time applauding and glorifying individual success, especially in men, irrespective of how they achieve it. And actually, we don't care about low-key, humble leaders who don't transcend and don't make for great Netflix or Amazon documentaries, but actually deliver results. And this, I think, is a fundamental weakness, cultural weakness of our zeitgeist of the world today, but much more likely to be found or much more common in America, especially the West Coast or LA, than it is in Tokyo or Seoul or Helsinki. So, there are cultural differences, and I think at the end, we will see the outcomes and the consequences of cultures have, because values drive behaviors and it drives what's rewarded and what's not rewarded. So in a culture that only glorifies and rewards people who worship themselves, irrespective of whether they have any talent or potential, we're all going to end up in trouble. Okay, Ariana says, what skills or qualities do you think are the best indicators of a competent leader? Okay, great question, Ariana. So I'd say domain relevant or technical expertise. You have to understand the industry, the area, the field you're in, not just because it will give you better experience to manage people and understand the expertise that other people have, but also because it will give you credibility. So, for example, to use a random example, does a reality TV star, comedian, or stand-up comedian meet the technical expertise requirements to run a country? Probably not. Second one is you need intelligence or strong, fast, raw mental horsepower. You need to be able to turn chaos and ambivalence into a set of reliable rules that help you make sense of ambiguity and helps you navigate a complex world. You need to be able to be data-driven and rational. It helps if we have leaders, I mean, it helps if they make rational rather than irrational decisions. And it helps if they're smart. Intelligence, by the way, is a proven antidote to bias and prejudice and discrimination. The smarter you are, the more likely you are to focus on merit and to give people a chance based on what they do and the skills they have, etc. So intelligence is very important, just like curiosity is very important, the will and the desire to learn, because even if you're very experienced and very knowledgeable, what you know is probably far less important than what you need to learn going forward. So curiosity is a natural companion to intelligence or cognitive ability. You probably want your leaders, or if you are trying to decode leadership potential, you should also focus on empathy. It's another indicator, the ability to understand what other people are thinking and feeling, and the ability to care about them. Although, as Paul Bloom argues in a great book called Against Empathy, titled Against Empathy, The Case for Rational Compassion, even if you're not naturally pre-wired to care about others and you not immediately intuitive feel other people's pain, there is no excuse for showing kindness and for being fair. And all of that is largely an intellectual and rational decision, as he well documents in this book. What else? I mean, another important attribute, probably the most important attribute of competence, is humility, or being ethical and moral and having integrity. In fact, how can you end up being a competent leader if you're a crook, if you don't care about others, if you have no ability to control your impulses and you lack self-control and you put yourself above rules, norms, and you're okay engaging in psychopathic antisocial behavior. So I think integrity and ethics is a great deterrent to that, a great antidote. And then finally, I think being humble is really important, because then it will enable you to be coachable and get better. So, we're not asking for much here. We're asking for expertise, intelligence, curiosity, empathy, integrity, and humility. How many people do you know who are in leadership roles and actually tick all these boxes? Not many. That explains the situation that we're in and how much we have to work to improve over the status quo. Moving on. So Niels says, what is your view on the present and future of even more automated AI assessment tools, for example, using video interviews or social media data? Niels, great question. Look, I think we are in the dial-up phase here. So, if we were comparing with the internet or the digital revolution, or the first instance of the digital revolution, remember when you used to dial to connect and that little noise came and then there was a very slow connection. It made us very happy because it still enabled us to connect to knowledge, things, people, and it was way better than a fax machine. But think about how much we advanced just in terms of internet speed and what that has enabled us to do, Wi-Fi, apps, etc. And to the point also what the downside is of that, which is we cannot disconnect. And here we are talking to ourselves in a screen all the time and spending more time creating data than not creating data, because we do it even when we sleep and when we're not talking to someone and when we're not browsing the web actively. So that's potentially the dark side. But it will improve, it will get better. I think the critical question is, do human recruiters and hiring manager today do a better job without the help of AI and data science and analytics, or with? And in almost all circumstances, the answer is with, especially if you want to optimize for speed, cost, and efficiencies. But even if you are optimizing for accuracy and you want to spend a lot of time and you have the benefit of time in your hands making consequential high-stake decisions on whom to select as a leader, you probably will do it better if you can be helped or supported by data, including AI, which is just something that happens to the data. Machine learning algorithms are recipes that have the ability to self-generate and improve and get better. So to use your example, Niels, I mean, social media data, most people, even when they are executive recruiters, would look at somebody's LinkedIn profile, would look at somebody's Facebook profile, Instagram, maybe even TikTok. Even if they're hiring senior leaders, they care about the reputation. Unfortunately, when they do that, all of their biases, all of their prejudices, all of their flawed intuitive tendencies are unleashed. So even if I'm looking at somebody's social media, would it help to have an algorithm that has scraped millions of profiles on social media and has related or linked certain signals, certain indicators to personality and intelligence, given that we have 150 papers by Michal Kosinski and others and teams showing that this methodology work is probably going to be more reliable. And when it comes to video interviews, if there is a connection between the things that we say and do in an interview, then for sure AI-based algorithms, machine-based algorithms, machine learning algorithms are going to be able to reveal it and identify it or decode it better than humans and more reliable. So let's say that, if I yawn in an interview, it means that I'm bored and disengaged and not highly motivated and have poor culture fit. I mean, that's one of potentially millions of signals that, if you're the hiring manager and you're just waiting for me to yawn, and then as soon as you do it, you're like, aha, this person is a poor candidate, a poor fit, poor match, then you're probably not paying attention to anything I do. You're probably not focusing on what I'm saying. And your ability to do this reliably while ignoring things like my gender, my social class, my verbal intelligence, my charisma, my presentational style, my attractiveness, and whether I have a piercing or tattoo in my face is, probably very poor. So even these Black Mirror-esque AI-based tools will help, can help, have helped. Of course, we have to design them in an ethical way and deploy them in an ethical way. Measuring for things such as adverse impact, demanding that there is explainability. Again, explainability is a really, really important and interesting factor, because we demand that no AI is deployed that is so-called black box models. So we don't want algorithms that tell us that somebody's score is 90 out of 100 or 20 out of 100. It doesn't explain why somebody should be hired or not. But you can always open up the algorithms and understand the reasoning or the formula, the algorithm that AI has followed. Whereas the only algorithm, decision-making algorithm, that can truly never be opened and exposed or unveiled or revealed is the human mind. If I'm a hiring manager and I say, okay, I like this person, I hire them, you don't know why I selected you. You don't know if it's because of your expertise, your haircut, because we support Manchester United, bad example because I don't, or whether it is because I truly made an accurate assessment of your competence. So I think in the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to see AI and human intelligence augment each other and work better in tandem. So that also means that today there are very, very few cases where you want just algorithms by themselves or alone making decisions. We need experts, not just vetting and designing AI, but also complementing it when it comes to making decisions. So that's that, Niels. Reese says, okay, just posting the article, thank you. Heather says, do you think our current culture of tech entrepreneurs who receive VC funding is proliferating this problem? They become CEOs when their actual data is creating technical viable product. I love this question, Heather. I think, I mean, intuitively, yes, but since I now spend 50 minutes lambasting and demolishing intuition, I don't want to respond, based on intuition. And I haven't seen any data that really factually addresses your point. I will say that there is a healthy trend among VCs and PE firms and investors to use data to assess leadership potential. In the old days, they would just put their own CFO and keep the founder. But I think now there is a healthy tendency to do due diligence also when it comes to scrutinizing the profile and the personality and the talent and the competence of the leader. Having said that, there's always the opportunity to make money by betting on the right bubble. And again, WeWork is a very good example of that. Smart investors, big for-profit rational banks made the wrong call, but they were very close of making a lot of money, mostly by betting on the right, wrong qualities, right? So if you have somebody who looks like a messiah and has created a cult and is so successful at drawing and inspiring people, it's perhaps easier to be a little bit more indifferent to whether they are actually a competent person and whether they have the right rational reasons to promote their vision, etc. And again, that's just an example. There are many, many that, but I think, everybody wants to end up with the right investment and make the right bets. But a lot of the times those bets depend on perception, and perception usually trumps reality. That's what we need to correct. So Mary says, great question. Heather, yes, I agree. Lisa says, thanks a lot. Lauren says, there is so much bias in the recruitment selection process. Statement, yes, that I agree with. Let's also look at the glass half full part of the issue, which is, 100 years ago, things were far worse. You would only get a job based on who you knew. Nepotism was far more likely and more common than meritocracy. There wasn't even an attempt to select people on the basis of their talent. Our view of talent was very restricted. Organizations didn't even feel guilty if they followed their intuition or focus on politics and nepotism. So the world was a lot less fair, far more plutocratic and nepotistic. And, social capital, which was a euphemism for nepotism, was the dominant currency. So 100 years is a very short time in the grand scheme of things if you think about human evolutions. And here we are, really, really trying to fine-tune the development of technologies and science-based tools and the application of it at scale in organizations to actually make organizations more meritocratic. And so, I think that's massive improvement, which doesn't mean we have solved the challenges, but I think there's a change in mindset, there's a change in intentions, and we have so many tools. So the big challenge is in being able to deploy them effectively and measuring, of course, returns on investment and success. And Heather says, okay, just talking about her, okay, discrimination. Okay, thank you, Heather. So I think with that, this may complete the Q&A portion. I may invite our moderator to come back, unless she's already watching Netflix or doing something interesting. Here you are. I think we have 3 or 4 minutes left.
Yeah, well, if there's no further questions, thank you so much, Tomas, for being here. Do you want to drop your LinkedIn profile in the chat for people if they want to take a look and connect with you there?
Yeah, I think they can just basically, I'm so old that I gave my website. This is like, it's like one level up from giving you my business card or my fax number. Luckily, I have to announce that I no longer use a fax machine. So here we are. So the web has information on everything, including the books and a lot of the research papers and the articles that underpinned this long session and mansplained monologue about the subject. And of course, the book available in your nearest bookstores, airports, many languages, including Mr. Bezos's shop. It has just been translated into Ukrainian. That's the last language. Of course, I think it will be very relevant in that country, given what they're going through right now, not when it comes to understanding their own leader, but their neighbor's personality.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today. If anybody has any questions, you know how to get in touch. So thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.